Okay, for part two of this lecture, we're going to look at the rights of stockholders. First of all, as you know, you can buy, sell stock, usually on a large stock exchange like New York Stock Exchange. American Stock Exchange is no longer with us, but most stocks now are traded automatically on the NASDAQ. Stands for National Automated Securities Dealers Automatic Quotation, or National Association of Securities Dealers Automatic Quotation. Chicago Board of Trade is where a lot of options and futures are traded as well. But anyway, these are various trade exchanges there. Um, Obviously, shareholders get a vote at shareholders meetings, and you get some preemptive purchase rights. What this means is if a company issues new stock and it's going to dilute your percent of ownership, you typically have a right to buy a proportional percentage of new stock to maintain your percent ownership of the company. Suppose you were one of the original investors and you bought enough shares to be 5% owner. Then they want to double the number of shares because they want to raise money to expand the business. You have a chance to buy those shares before they issue them to anyone else, so you can maintain your percentage of ownership. That's what that means. Okay. Obviously, the more shares you own, the more dividends you get, because dividends are issued per share. We're going to spend a lot of time on that in this lecture here. You get a proportional share of assets if the company was liquidated. Of course, this is after anyone to whom the company owes debt, including bondholders. So as we talked about in chapter 11, in chapter 10, the bondholders are in line before shareholders. By the time a company is liquidated, typically stockholders get very, very little, if anything. Stock prices do go to zero in some cases, and so that is one thing to consider. You have greater risk with stock. Most people would argue, or most research dictates, you have a higher upside, but you also have a lower downside. Bonds are a little bit less volatile, and bondholders usually get some sort of their principal back, if not all of it. Stock, if the company fails, you get almost nothing. Common stock is if the company issues preferred stock first, then common stock is usually the second class of stock issued and has the same rights of ownership. Preferred stock has first rights to dividends. So there's a saying, you would prefer to own something other than preferred stock. Well, it depends on the age of the company. If the company is well established and has a long and successful life, then common stockholders can get more dividends than preferred stockholders. But early in the company's life, the preferred shareholders are paid dividends first before any common stockholders get any dividends at all. And these are fixed. These are guaranteed dividends. But if the company is wildly successful, then common stockholders can get more dividends than preferred. Preferred is fixed and they're first in line. Okay. Now, one thing that's interesting is in the classes of stock, you can have different classes of each. You can have Class A shares. You can have Class B shares. In other words, if you are one of the principals of the company, one of the principal owners, you can have Class A shares that you have that have all the voting rights, and then other people can have limited or no voting rights. In some cases, I've seen small companies owned by the wives of the company, and actually wives then there was an advantage with a specific company where they got specific contractual benefits with the federal government, where if they were going to go get a government job, they were placed higher on the government's ranking list because they were technically a female-owned company. The guys are making all the decisions, but these owners had actually given 51% of their shares to their wives, therefore they qualified as a female-owned company. Interestingly enough, later in that company's life, they actually sold those shares to a tribe of Aleut Indians up in Alaska for the same reason. The Aleut Indians, I guess, were, I guess they're Aleut Native Americans, actually would be the right term. They were the highest ranking list on government contracts, so they thought the company owners were going to get more government contracts if they actually technically, on paper, were owned by this tribe of Aleut Indians. So all kinds of different things can happen with shares. Very interesting gimmicks or policies, if you will. When dividends are issued, the board of directors declares the dividend, and that's the stockholders' reward for investing in the company. And in Business One, we used to write it down like this: dividends. We used to say dividends were a debit, and then cash was the credit. Well, that was a lie, or it was a simplification. Really, what happens is dividends are declared with a debit here, then dividends payable is the corresponding credit. There's a date of declaration. That's when the dividend is announced. They say $1.25 per share. They have what's called a date of record and then a date of payment. One thing that's interesting is on the date of record, if you own the stock on that date, that means you're going to get the dividend. If you sell it the very next day, you still get the dividend. So what happens here is the date of payment might not be till weeks after the date of record. And what happens then is, let's suppose it's a $2 per share dividend. Let's suppose it's Microsoft. If you sell your stock the day after the date of record, you still get the $2 dividend. So what happens right after the date of record is the stock price should technically fall by exactly $2. It doesn't always do that, but what's called X and cum stock prices are, if you sell the stock the day after the date of record, it should not include that dividend. In other words, the price falls theoretically by exactly the amount of the dividend. Okay, what happens later is the dividends payable. That's a liability account. Notice the payable that goes down with a debit, and of course cash is issued. This asset account goes down with a credit. So there's two different steps in declaring dividends and then paying dividends. This is very different than business one. In business one, we kind of told you a simplified version, which was dividends debit, cash credit. It actually happens in two steps. Okay. Calculating dividend payments is very important, and this is where a lot of your homework is. Okay. Preferred shareholders get their dividend first if the funds are available. If the company is not profitable enough, well, there's no dividend. If the company directors deem that even if there is adequate money, they don't feel like it's wise to pay the dividend, they won't. Okay. If the shareholders are paid first, then you have money left over that's divided up amongst the common stock shareholders. Okay. So let's do an example here. Company has 5,000 shares at $2 non-participating preferred stock, and then sells 20,000 shares of common stock. Let's suppose their net income is 35K, and they will retain 20,000 of the 35,000, and they'll distribute the rest in dividends. Okay, don't worry about non-participating. It means non-voting primarily. Preferred stock gets first, and I think the first thing you need to see is, well, how much money was left over in dividends? Okay, well, net income is 35. They're going to keep 20, and this was mean retained earnings, right? That goes into retained earnings. Retained earnings is the same as net income, less the dividends. So what happens is 35 minus 20, you got $15,000 paid out in dividends. Well, right now, one of the things you should be thinking about is, well, how much goes to preferred? Well, $2 per share times 5,000 shares, 10,000 of that 15,000 total paid out is going to go to the preferred stock shareholders. Okay, so here we go. 10,000 of them, that means there's 5,000 left over, and there were how many shares of common stock? I'm going to go back here a second because I don't remember. Looks like there was 20,000 shares of common stock, so you do this. Take that remaining 5,000, right? There was 15,000 total. 10,000 of the 15,000 paid out in dividends goes to the preferred. That means $5,000 remain for the common stockholders. So 5,000 divided by 20,000 shares is actually, just drop the zeros, you get 5 divided by 20, and that comes out to be a quarter per share, or $0.25 per share. Okay, that's how you'd figure out your per share calculations. Be careful of the questions. Sometimes they ask for total dollars paid out to all shareholders. Sometimes they ask for dollars per share, so watch that. The preferred shareholders will always get $2 per share as long as there's enough money to cover that. Okay, the common shareholders, their dollars per share will depend on how much money the company makes. Okay, but the preferred shareholders, that's fixed. It's either zero or it's the full amount. Okay, there's two types of preferred that you'll need to understand, cumulative versus non-cum. Preferred shareholders only get paid if sufficient funds are available. If they're not paid, cumulative means they get all their past dividends in arrears before the common stock shareholders get any dividend. If the preferred shares are non-cum, that means there's no right to past dividends. Okay, you missed it, we're not going to pay it, there's no right to go get it later in the future. But on cumulative preferred stock, you have to pay them the full amount of all dividends in all past years in which you did not pay them. Okay, so here's an example. Suppose Radiology Labs has 20,000 shares, $2 per share. Non-participating, non-cum preferred stock, it's $100 par. There's 250,000 shares of common stock at $50 par. Okay, so during the first 5 years, they're going to pay out this much money as total dividend payments. 0, 40 grand, 90 grand, 200 grand, 240 grand. The question posed to you is to calculate the dividends per share for each type of stock for each of the 5 years. So think about it here. What would you do? All right. Year one's pretty easy. Nobody gets nothing. Year two, is there enough money to pay the preferred shareholders? Well, pretty simple calculations, okay? $20,000 per share times $2 per share, you need 40 grand. Well, that's exactly what they paid, right? 40 grand. So they're going to get their $2 per share, and there's nothing left over for the common shareholders. So figure out what the preferred people get, figure out what the common stockholders get, and then, I'm sorry, figure out what the preferred people get, and then if there's anything left over, divide it among the common stockholders, okay? Now notice here, okay, there's a lot of extraneous information. You don't need the $100 par value. You don't need the $50 par value for the common stockholders. That's just extra information. Later we'll talk about if they don't give you dollars per share and they give you a percentage, then you do need that par value, okay? But in this problem, you just say 20,000 shares, $2 per share, 40 grand. In year one, can't pay anything. In year two, I can barely pay something. I can barely pay off the preferred shareholders. In year three, that's the first year I'm going to have extra after paying the 40 grand to the preferred people. That's the first year I'm going to have extra for the common stockholders. So let's look at how it looks, okay? Year one, nothing. Nobody gets anything. Year two, there was 40 grand paid, so 40 grand goes to the preferred shareholders. There's nothing left over for the common shareholders. Year three, there's $40,000 to the preferred. That's all they get. It's fixed. If you can pay 40, you can do it. If there's more than $40,000 to be paid out, then the leftover goes to the common shareholders. Well, it was 90 total, so 40 goes to preferred, 50K left over, right? That's 90 minus 40. This goes to the common stockholders, so $50,000 divided by 250,000 shares outstanding. This means 20 cents per share. So every single common stockholder gets 20 cents per share that they own. All right, year four, I think we had $200,000 paid out, so 40K goes to preferred. That means 160K left over, right? 200K total minus 40 paid out leaves 160 left over. So I go 160K divided by 250K in shares. That means 64 cents per share for every common stockholder. Year five, I believe it was 250,000 or 240,000 paid out. So 40K goes to preferred, 200K left over. That's 240 minus the 40 here gives you 200K left over. So 200,000 divided amongst 250,000 shares gives us 80 cents per share for the common stockholders. Okay, I hope that was clear. I hope it's simple. Your homework will ask you to do calculations like this. I have one extra question for you though. How would your answers change if these were cumulative preferred stock and not non-cum? All right, think about it. Remember this little note here, the little asterisk from last problem. Pay the dividend when you can, divide remaining dollars among common stockholders. Remember, you have to factor in any dividends owed in arrears if you have cumulative preferred stock. So if this problem were to be rephrased as cumulative, it would look like this, right? Year zero is the same. Nobody got nothing. Year two, you barely had enough to pay them for year two. You were still not able to pay off what you owed them in year one. So you pay what you can pay. There's zero left over for common stockholders or anything left over to pay year one. Okay. Now in year two, or in year three, this is where it changes. If you had $90,000 paid out in dividends, first of all, you're going to pay 40K to the preferred shareholders for the current year, year three. But also you still owe for year one. So you're going to double the dividend to preferred because you owe them $40,000 for the current year, year three, and another $40,000 for year one in arrears. So you actually pay out $80,000 of the $90,000 total to the preferred shareholders. So 90 minus 80, you have a double payment here to preferred, leaves only $10,000 left over for common shareholders. Oops, and I've got a typo here. This 50 right here should say $10,000. That's a mistake. Okay, so 90 minus 80 gives us 10. This should say 10 divided by 250. I think my math is right though. 10 divided by 250 equals 0.04 per share for common stock shareholders. Okay, year four. Now we've paid off year one. Year two, we paid them. Year three, we made the double payment. So year four is the same as in the previous problem. We're good. Year five, same thing. Year four and five are unaffected because year three, was the only year in which we had to make a double payment, and we covered the full payment in year 3. Okay, so keep in mind this 50K should say 10, that's a typo, but 10K left over from the 90K total paid out. 90 minus 8, it gives me 10. 10 divided by 250 should give me 0.04. This 0.04 is correct. And your dollars per share to the preferred would actually be $4 per share in year 3. Every other year it was 0, 2, 4, $2 per share, $2 per share. And then the common stockholders, the only year that was changed from the previous problem was this one, 4 cents per share, as opposed to 20 cents per share. Okay, I hope that makes it very clear to you. One last detail about dividends. Some dividend problems will, instead of saying $2 per share or $5 per share, they will say a percent per share. Now, in that case, you do need to know the par value, and you would simply multiply the 7.5% times the value of the stock. In other words, if it was 7.5% preferred stock and it was $10 par, you would simply multiply the $10 times 7.5% or 0.075, move the decimal 2 places here, and you'd get 75 cents per share. That would be the total dividend. And so now you would treat this 75 cents per share just as we treated the $2 per share in this problem. Okay, hope that helps. And that is the second chunk of these lectures there for us.